Let me tell you a story about how I had 7 books on my TBR, read 10, and somehow still managed to fail. Hello fellow readers and readeresses, I come to you today from my car in the middle of nowhere to do my March reading wrap-up. I think I need to turn the car around because the sun is right here and I think it's gonna get worse. I think that's much better. So, in the month of March, I only had 7 books on my TBR, and I say only because usually I get a little more than that, and I had very high hopes that I will be able to actually complete this TBR this time. Unfortunately, the month ended up being very busy and I was frankly a little distracted, and then after one very strange reading experiment and the subsequent mini reading slump that I entered right after it, I had like a week that I read almost absolutely nothing. And on top of that, I had a few books left over from February that I needed to finish, which complicated the situation additionally. Long story short, I was not able to complete my March TBR, but I'm not here to complain, I'm here to report, which is what I'm gonna do right now. First things first, let's go through my March TBR really quickly. We have Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan, which was a bookshelf jar pick, followed by The Lost Hero by Riordan, which was a prompt cards pick for a book you've wanted to reread. Number 3 on the list was Only Human by Sylvain Neuvel, which was a genre pick for sci-fi. Number 4 was Life on the Mississippi by Twain, which was another bookshelf jar pick. Number 5 was Short Story Masterpieces with a Twist Ending Volume 2, which was a genre tile pick for classics. Number 6 was Into the Sunken City by Dinesh Thiru, which was a prompt cards pick for the prompt A Book by a Debut Author. And book number 7 was Anne of the Island by Lucy Maud Montgomery, which was for the Buzzword Reading Challenge, where the prompt for March was to have the character name and the book title. This book also doubled up for my Adventure in Eldia Reading Challenge, where the prompt for March was to read a book that's neither the first nor the last in the series. Now that we know my TBR for March, let's go through the books that I read in the order in which I picked them up. Starting with The Heroes of Olympus by Riordan. This is a YA mythological fantasy and the first book in the Heroes of Olympus series. This is the series that follows the Percy Jackson series, which I absolutely adore, and I started reading it a while back. I read the first and I think half of the second book and never managed to finish it because there were other things that I needed to take care of, and I've always regretted not finishing the series because I remember what I've read from it I actually very much enjoyed. So when I got the opportunity to pick a book that I wanted to reread, this one immediately came to mind, and frankly this book did not disappoint whatsoever. We had a very nice continuation of the Percy Jackson series with a bit of an extended cast of characters and even higher stakes, if that is even possible. What I really liked in this first book were the 3 POV characters that we follow. I thought every single one was done masterfully, and I think that is the main difference that I find between the Percy Jackson series and this second series, or at least with this book. I actually empathize more with and understand better the main characters that we follow. I think they're a little more mature because they're a little older than the ones that we have in the Percy Jackson series. They're a little more reasonable, they're a little more complex, and therefore they were easier to empathize with, or at least that's how it was for me. I also very much enjoyed the mystery that was woven in this book, as well as the arch enemy that our characters have. I think that was top-notch. So I gave the book 4 stars, and I am very much looking forward to continuing with the series. Then we had The Bitter Twins by Jen Williams. This is an adult high fantasy and the second book in the Winnowing Flame trilogy. This was a great second entry in this series, if not a perfect book. We had way more revelations, some of which straight up crazy. We had way more character and relationship complexity, and all the things hit all the fans. Beware though, this can be a little bit of a frustrating read because so many bad things happened in so many unexpected ways. I gave the book 4 stars, mostly because I wish it had focused more on the initial characters that we started with, and it's not that we didn't see them at all, but they were not as prevalent as I had hoped initially. And I'm just gonna end this review with the following statement. Vincenza Vintage de Grazon is a saint and deserved way better. If you've read the book, you know. Next I picked up Into the Sunken City by Dinesh Thiru. This is a standalone YA sci-fi adventure, though the sci-fi part is with an asterisk, and I'm gonna explain that in a bit. This was one of my most anticipated releases of 2024, and while it wasn't technically a bad book, it ended up being kind of a disappointment. We follow a young girl, I think 19-year-old, who has lost her father in a diving accident and is now taking care of the inn that he used to own, and her younger sister, who is I think 14. They receive a mysterious guest in the inn that wants them to go with her on a trip treasure hunt, and the story goes from there. So this premise was very interesting to me, and I was really looking forward to reading the book, and there are some things in it that I genuinely enjoyed. Like the representation of grief in this book, I think was very nicely done, and it spoke to me on a personal level. I also very much enjoyed the author's writing style, though I don't think it's going to appeal to everybody. He utilizes these very short sentences very much to the point, where he has trimmed everything that can be trimmed. I think those are very suitable for action-adventure novels especially. Another thing is that the author has divulged quite a bit of knowledge about diving, so he either did a very thorough research on the topic or he's an enthusiast. Either way, I quite enjoy it when the author knows what they're talking about. Now, I'm gonna interject a bit of a note here because I saw somebody mention that some things didn't necessarily make sense when it comes to diving, so I think this is the best moment to mention that I know absolutely nothing on the topic, so it seemed well researched to me, but maybe that's not the case. And the last thing on the list of things that I liked is gonna be the atmosphere. There is this sense of gloom and eternal humidity that just got me feeling cold even on warm nights. On top of that, what I think was a very nice touch was the fact that the conditions that people lived in were reflected both in their culture and in their language, and I think that made it feel a little more real. Unfortunately, that concludes the list of things that I actually enjoyed, and we're gonna move on now to the list of things I didn't. Starting with the characters and relationships, which I find to be one of the most important things about a book, if not the most important one. If there is one archetype that I hate to see being propped up in a book, that's gonna be the ignorant know-it-all. And in this book, we have that character in the face of Jin's younger sister, Tara. A kid of 14 that acts with no care or common sense somehow ends up being correct every single time, even though, by all that we're shown on page, she shouldn't be. I really can't stand this type of nonsense, and I'm not saying that a 14-year-old couldn't possibly be right. But in this case, the way this girl acted and the decisions that she made should have by all means landed her in hot water, and they never did. I mean, it's a nice fantasy to believe that everyone cares about you and that everyone you communicate with is gonna have the best intentions. It's also important to keep positive attitude. However, one should also exercise minimal caution, especially given the circumstances these people live in. And if in your book you have a character that acts like a total dummy but somehow always ends up being on top in an unironic way, I'm gonna have to conclude that you don't really know how to write proper character arc. On top of that, our main character Jin was absolutely insufferable to me. She did absolutely nothing but complain, make people uncomfortable, overreact, then overreacting about the fact that people don't tell her things because she's always overreacting. It was just such a struggle to root for her. Additionally, this stupid love story between her and what's his name was so unnecessary. It was so dry and unrealistic and boring. I didn't see an ounce of actual chemistry between those two. Not to mention the way that the guy acted at the end of the book and the way that the author wanted us to interpret that. There's no way in hell that ever makes sense. Another thing I didn't like was the pacing and the execution of the plot. The whole thing was written in such a meandering way, with focus on things that shouldn't have mattered whatsoever, that it robbed the whole story of any excitement or suspense. And then there was the ending, which was one of the most lukewarm things I have ever seen and resolved close to nothing, especially when it comes to Jin's big dream, which was dragged around like this big, very important thing, and then it ended up nowhere. I'm gonna end with two more things here. The first of which is the fact that I hated that this book was marketed as sci-fi, because there is no science in this book whatsoever. There were a few words of speculation that were thrown in kind of haphazardly and as an afterthought, but that was pretty much it. And because of the lack of science and proper thought of how these things could be, the world building didn't really make sense. I'm gonna give you one simple example with the first thing about this book. It's been raining for 500 years continuously, and it continues to rain with no sign of stoppage. Where is this water coming from? There is a finite amount of water, and it circulates continuously. It needs time to evaporate, condense, and then turn into rain. But it hasn't stopped raining for 500 years. You know, the sky doesn't produce water, right? It doesn't come from space. So where is the water coming from? When you're building a sci-fi world like that, you need to have a proper explanation for those things, or at least probable speculation. And frankly, in this book, I didn't see anything close to that. And that was just one small thing that really grated on me, but there was a plethora of things that didn't make sense. So all that being said, I felt really lukewarm about this book, and I gave it low 3 stars. Next, I picked up Life on the Mississippi by Mark Twain. This is a very detailed memoir about the author's apprenticeship and work as a steamboat pilot on the Mississippi River, and then later on traveling on it as a passenger. And when I say very detailed, I mean very detailed. We get a large portion of minute facts and feelings about the pilot job, about the river itself, about the little towns around it, as well as quite a few anecdotes. I personally very much enjoyed this book, though I suspect it's going to be considered rather dry and boring by the majority of readers. The author spared no effort to describe the river, the job, the people, the towns, the boats, the organizations of the time. There is also quite a bit of the characteristic for the author's sarcasm, which made me cackle a few times. It was a good relaxing read. I liked it. I gave it 4 stars. Oh, this book also taught me what a Mark Twain is, and now I know why the author chose this pen name. I found it quite interesting. Next, I picked up 3 books that I'm not going to talk about in this video because I have a full 40-minute video about those 3 books, and those are Ice Planet Barbarians, I'm Gay for My Living Billionaire Jet Plane, and Triceratops and Bottoms. I'm not gonna give you any further context. I'm gonna link the video here. Watch it if you want. It was a terrible reading experiment. I'm glad it's over. To contrast these books endlessly, next I picked up a book that I'm also not going to talk about, and that is And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Fredrik Bakman. This is a contemporary novella about a man who lives with Alzheimer's, and as I said, I'm not going to talk about it because frankly, I'm not ready. I'm just going to say that this book is very special to me, and this is the second time I read it. Next I picked up Only Human by Sylvain Neuvel. This is an adult sci-fi novel and the third and final book in the Themis Files series. The first 2 books of this series were absolutely phenomenal. I loved both of them, and I was really looking forward to reading this one. However, this book took a direction that I really wish it hadn't. It became a sci-fi adjacent melodrama where the focus was on what I can only describe as navel gazing. And the setting could have been so interesting, but all the mystery, science, and excitement were taken away and replaced with everyday minutia and a repetitive barrage of platitudes. Additionally, some of the political points that the author made were frankly embarrassing. Now, I don't claim to be a paragon of political theory, but I can spot a logical inconsistency as well as anyone, and there were quite a few of those in this book. Not to mention, it was so on the nose, no nuance whatsoever. The author might as well have stuffed all of his political talking points into a pillowcase and whacked the reader over the face with it. It felt artificial and demonstrative, but more than that, that's not what I came here for. Know the audience that you've already built, sir. This is book number 3 in a series. If you offer me a space robot sci-fi, I better see some heavy science. I want to hear engineering talk, preferably some quantum mechanics, and I better feel both mind-blown and stupid while reading it. And you need to pick up the pacing. Instead, I am being lectured on social subjects that I've already considered thoroughly in my day-to-day life, and I'm not even offered a fresh perspective. Just the same old song that I've already heard through and through, and more importantly, didn't ask for. I feel like the author all of a sudden decided that he wanted to make this particular point, and he started working towards that point at the expense of the actual story. On top of that, the author chose to elevate as the best of them all a character with absolutely no redeeming qualities. Just a very rude, angry, ignorant person that I'm told that everybody likes because they're authentic, as though the only way to be authentic is to be an asshole. All the other characters that I've known and loved from previous books were reduced to complete jokes. So overall, I didn't like the characters, I didn't like the story, I didn't like the world building, and as such, I'm gonna give the book 2 stars. This has got to be one of the worst last books in a series that I've ever read. And last, but definitely not least, in the month of March, I finished Wrath by John Gwynne. This is an adult epic fantasy and the 4th and final book in the Faithful and the Fallen series, which is one of my favorite series of all times, as it turns out. This was a very thorough and mostly satisfying ending, and I'm not gonna talk about it too much because I don't want to spoil you about anything. I gave the book 4 stars, and why I took away a star is because I think it dragged a bit too much in the middle, which made the resolution of some of the conflicts a little anticlimactic. I also wish there was a little more of a gut punch at the end of this book, and there was some of that too, but I feel like it ended a little too happily, which is a personal thing. I know that most people actually like that, and I do too, but I also like to suffer a little more when I read this type of books. other than that, this was a great book and a very good conclusion to one of my favorite series, as I already mentioned. And so to summarize, in the month of March, I read 10 books for a total of 3,418 pages. In terms of genre, I read 1 classic, 1 contemporary, 3 fantasies, 3 romances, and 2 science fictions. And in terms of formatting, I read 4 paperbacks, 1 hardback, and 5 ebooks. As I mentioned earlier, I wasn't able to complete my TBR. I have 3 books left over: Age of Myth, Short Story Masterpieces with a Twist Ending Volume 2, and Anne of the Island, all of which I've been able to start and will include in my April wrap-up. And I think that'll do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it, and please let me know what you read in the month of March and what were some of your favorite reads of the month. Thank you so much for watching, and if you'd like to see my TBR for April, check out this video. Bye!